I'm Julia. I'm a white, middle-class, cisgendered, older adult female, a northerner who has been continuing to learn about what it means to be white in this country. Since early childhood, I had observed difference among people in the areas where I grew up, primarily San Diego and New Jersey. Then through the broadening experiences provided by my family and my church youth group, my observations slowly became questions which were encouraged in our household and church. But the efforts to connect white suburban contexts to communities of color were about interracial relations. No one had yet named the contrasting experiences as white privilege or racism. It was not until I became a member and involved as a member and eventually as staff in global ministries and United Methodist Women's Organization that I began to understand white privilege and the racist history, structural and institutional racism, including the church's racist history, and the need for anti-racist work at all levels of society. I was not certain what I would experience when I signed up for the Southeast Civil Rights Trip, an invitation just sent by email by Lee. I replied immediately, but I had not spent much time in the South and have wanted to see the sites of events that had moved me in my own journey to unpack racism in the United States and my own racism. Even as we started the trip, I was unsure what I would experience, but I wanted to go.
What was I searching for? What did I go on this civil rights trip for? It's a good question, and one I considered a great deal before saying yes. In his essay, The Creative Process, James Baldwin writes, "We know in the case of a person that whoever cannot tell himself the truth about his past is trapped in it, immobilized in the prison of his undiscovered self." I have internalized that bit of wisdom over the years. I believe very strongly that we must examine ourselves. If we simply take on and live out what has been given to us in the way of circumstance or privilege or identity without being critical or curious about our circumstance, we live an unexamined life. Doing so can make us perpetrators of oppressive systems that operate with great ease. Jesus asks, "What are you searching for?" Now, inside that question, I hear an instruction. I should be searching for something. I went south this time not to go home, not to see family, not to visit these familiar places, but to continue to examine myself. Taking with me this time the parts and perspectives of the 22 years I have lived outside of my native Mississippi. I hope to kind of confront the places where my learning since then, since leaving the South, might collide with the life and experience I had while there. I sought, I guess, some sort of integration between my inherited ancestral past, with my past as a privileged but queer kid from the South, to my more recent history of a person learning to undo my own racism and confront white supremacy in the U.S. context. It's a work that I began a long time ago, but one that I started to see in a new way while studying under the great Dr. James Cone, founder of Black Liberation Theology and mentor to me during my time at Union Theological Seminary. On one day in class, he said, "I would much rather be a part of the history of the lynched than the lynchers." That statement gutted me and jolted me to do the hard work of extricating myself from the sins of my ancestry by being aware of my whiteness and doing the lifelong work of getting out of it, while not getting mired down in white guilt or fragility. Now, I've tried to do that through study and training, relationships, justice work, listening, prayer, lots and lots of failure, spiritual development, and mentoring others to share and pass on power. But this trip would give me the opportunity to go to Atlanta, Montgomery, Selma, and Birmingham, to places that I knew as a child but wanted to know as an adult, to bring together some of the conflicts housed within me. So I set out to search for the things that escaped my childhood learning and young adult learning while I was still there, either by cultural and contextual omission or naivete. The biggest gap I had learned since was the reality of lynching and Mississippi's awful status as the state that perpetrated the most lynching of any other. I vowed as I went to look the history and myself in the face. So I went with the intention of paying attention.
Come and see. It was important to me to come and see the locations that were embedded in my memories experience of the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement became the background sound and images of my high school and college years. The Montgomery bus boycott, Martin Luther King, Ebenezer Baptist Church, Selma, Bull Connor, Governor Wallace, Viola Liuzzo, Birmingham, Freedom Summer, marches, bombings, water hoses, attack dogs, all played out on the TV and sometimes tense conversations at home. I began to unpack the racist history of this country. In the 1960s, I wanted to go south to help on voter registration, but my parents cautioned violence. I did not go. I was an obedient daughter. There's not time this morning to go into all the events, discussions, unlearning, emptying out that disturbed, disrupted, and shaped me. But in November, when I walked into Atlanta's Ebenezer Baptist Church, Martin Luther King's pastoral home, I was overwhelmed with the pain of history, a gratitude for the movement, a grief of the deeply rooted racism in this country, and yet a release for things hoped for. I could only sit in deep silence. In 1965, Viola Liuzzo, a white activist from Detroit, went to Selma, prompted by Bloody Sunday and King's identifying the struggles in Alabama as everybody's fight. She participated in the third Selma March. She volunteered to drive marchers back to the Montgomery airport. Klansmen targeted her and murdered her on the side of US Highway 80. She was 39 years old. While traveling along that same route one evening on our November journey, we passed by the simple stone slab memorial along the highway where she was murdered. My eyes were all the more opened by my memory of this brutal attack. And this highway was a major dual-lane US highway that runs across the middle of Alabama. This was not an isolated country road. The highway has not really changed since 1965, we were told. This is where the marchers walked and later where Viola Liuzzo was killed. I was struck with how much that has not changed, and was struck with how much has not changed and what still needs to be changed.
Jesus said to the disciples who were bold enough to ask, "Come and see." I saw so much that I hadn't known, like for many folks of my age and younger. Facets of the civil rights movement have been sort of conflated or like smushed together somehow. While we know the major milestones and events, even the soundtrack, we haven't been gifted with the details, and it matters to know them. An example of this learning for me is the bus boycott of Montgomery. Now, we know it began when Rosa Parks said, no, because she didn't want to stand from her seat and move to the back of the bus to give her seat to a white person. We know it lasted a very long time, and we know that the Supreme Court ruled segregation on public transportation unconstitutional, and that the bus company eventually gave in. But what I had not understood was the landscape and architecture of the movement itself. The immense amount of work that had been done before the boycott was launched and then that followed. Rosa Parks had gone through activism training. And originally, the boycott was to be on December 5th, 1955, and that day only. But after the distribution of 52,500 pamphlets to advertise it and spread the word, 65,000 citizens, that's out of 100,000, participated. Activists determined after this huge success to make it a movement. Now, they had one night to make it work, and this vast network of clergy, civic leaders, and activists did it. They organized the Montgomery Improvement Association, made Dr. King the president of it, and launched a sustainable operation to replace bus transportation for as many people as possible. They created, in essence, a cab service of private vehicles. They charted pickups and drop-offs. With each ordinance passed to try and crush their efforts, leaders managed to outthink and out-organize the government. And they had to make it work not for a day, not for a week, but for 382 days that it lasted. My travel notebook is filled with figures, numbers, and those ordinances. My eyes were opened to the depth of their commitment. I saw the value of community over any one individual in all of their plans. I saw names of activists that didn't make the national headlines, but who were hatching plans and making fixes to continue this effort day after day after day. I saw, through these people and their actions, a relentless faith in what was right and what was necessary, and in God. I found Jesus again in the fine print of Birmingham, where there is still a palpable and righteous annoyance that King is most associated with the work done in that city, and not the leader, Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth, and the network of community organizers there. In the museum and in the testimonies of activists like Bishop Woods, whom we met with, we learned that the community there had been organizing for 6 long years before King ever joined their local fight. And even that was a strategy, when to invite King and connect the local expression of the movement with its national counterpart. I saw more divine details when standing in the square across from 16th Street Baptist Church. I learned that an unknown car had been found in the church parking lot that Sunday early morning. It was reported by a member of the very well-organized Neighborhood Watch, conceived of and operated with great success, in a real and necessary way to protect the Black community. When the police looked into the windows of that unknown car, they found dynamite. The police reported it to Bull Connor. Connor said he could do nothing. It wasn't used dynamite, after all. It was just sitting there. Within hours, that dynamite was moved by domestic terrorists to underneath the stairs that went into the church. Not long after that, 4 little girls lost their lives on their way to Sunday school. My eyes and heart were opened to see the enormous amount of work over such a long time by committed individuals who became holy community and who together brought the kingdom closer and brought a nation nearer to justice. I saw with the eyes of an experience of a pastor, an activist, a teacher, a wife, and a mother what must have been mountains of work. The spreadsheets of contact information, the agendas and minutes taken at mass meetings, the phone trees, the filled calendars, the strategy sessions, the debriefing sessions, the training courses, the leadership development, the letter writing, and then the trust in strategy for all those that followed and took part. I saw all of that effort up close on this trip, from regular folks who were, at the same time they were changing history, living full lives with full plates. Details matter, timelines do too. It's the minutia that make movements possible. Sabrina Fountain, in her book, The Courage to See, writes, "Sometimes I wonder why it is that seeing things takes courage, perhaps because seeing might ask us to change, which is hard, or even harder, seeing might implicate us somehow, bring to light something we would rather not face." In Montgomery, I saw jar after jar of soil collected from lynching sites at the Legacy Museum. And at the memorial, I made my own small pilgrimage to stand in front of or underneath each column bearing a name of a county of Mississippi and inscribed with names of persons murdered. It took a long time to do that, too long. Now I have seen the horror, and it cannot be unseen. And it has changed me, surely, but explaining how is difficult. But it is the knowledge I have and must use. It's activated when I see traces of racialized atrocities being done right now in the dark, because no one would stand by them in the light. Or when I hear leaders with real power claim they have none. Or when ordinances, laws, and codes are maneuvered to target the most vulnerable, invariably brown and black folks. I can now see the evolution of white supremacy as plainly as a glass jar filled with soil or an 8-foot cement column. My responsibility then, as a citizen, as a Christian, is to continue to evolve too, reacting to all that I have seen and now all that I know. Jesus said to the disciples, "Come and see." He didn't say, "Think about my offer some more, and then make up your mind whether you want to journey with me. See who I am, maybe where I go." Jesus said to his students, "Come and see."
Come and see, and was asked, "Where are you staying?" And remain with me for a while. At the lynching memorial, I looked for the monuments from Pennsylvania and New York, places in my own journey. I found them. Frank Meadows, July 27, 1917, Chester County, Pennsylvania. Robert Lewis, June 2nd, 1892, Orange County, New York. Close to home and not so long ago in my own parents' and grandparents' parallel lifetimes. I came and saw the difficult places of violence and sacrifice, remembering my own inadequate responses to injustice in my lifetime. But I saw that where I was in my own journey is not where I was staying in my childhood, my adolescence, or my younger adulthood, or even last year. The November experience was not a trip. It was part of my continuing journey, but I cannot stay there either. The responsibility of those of us in the dominant culture, we white people in the United States and globally, and those who claim to be Jesus followers, is to constantly learn, unlearn, and unpack our own racism and the country's racist systems to be anti-racist, individually and collectively. We might begin, for example, with participating in Benz's ethics study after church today. Our journeys are a call to remain in the hard work, but not to stay or get stuck or immobilized. It is lifelong work. Where are you staying? That is where you start. What are you looking for? Begin the journey. Come and see. And as is written on one of the walls at the lynching memorial, we will remember with hope because hopelessness is the enemy of justice. With courage, because peace requires bravery. With persistence, because justice is a constant struggle. With faith, because we shall overcome.
Lord, I'm running, trying to make 100, 99 and a half won't do.